I never imagined I would find myself standing in front of this grand skyscraper. The entrance was decorated with tall floral arrangements, and its glass windows shimmered under the golden city lights. Guests stepped out of luxury cars, dressed in their finest attire. Women wore dazzling gowns while men, wrapped in a world of power and prestige, laughed and mingled in tailored tuxedos. Then came the invitation: Claudia's wedding. My ex-wife. I had no reason to attend, no place in her new world. I had pushed her out of my thoughts, letting time and distance erase the bitter ending we had shared. I had moved on. At least, that's what I had convinced myself. But then the handwritten invitation arrived. The moment I saw the familiar curve of her handwriting, I felt something unexpected, a quiet elegance, a deliberate touch. I hope you'll go. That was all she wrote. No explanation. Nothing more. I should have ignored it. But those 4 words lingered, heavy with meaning. A man's curiosity can lead him to places he knows he shouldn't go. Stepping into the grand ballroom felt like entering another era. Chandeliers hung like cascading stars, their crystals scattering light across the polished marble floors. Waiters moved gracefully, balancing trays of champagne, while a live orchestra played a melody so soft it seemed to dissolve into the air. Claudia had always dreamed of a life like this, far removed from the one we had once shared. I kept to the shadows unnoticed, at least until I saw him. Richard. The man who had taken my place. I knew exactly who he was. How could I not? A finance mogul, a member of the elite. His face often appeared in business publications. And now, standing beside my ex-wife, he was the center of attention. His presence was undeniable, his arm wrapped possessively around Claudia's waist. Then his gaze landed on me. I expected him to ignore me, to act as though I were nothing more than a ghost from Claudia's past. As though I didn't exist. But instead he grinned. It was a patronizing grin. The kind men like him wore when they looked down on those they considered beneath them. He stepped forward, his voice a low sneer. You're a middle-class nobody. A school dropout. Why don't you cut your losses and walk away? I met his gaze, studying the arrogance on his face, the way his lips curled with smug satisfaction. He expected me to shrink under his words. I could have reacted. I could have let my pride push me into a confrontation. But I didn't. I just smiled. Because if Richard truly believed I was nothing more than a forgotten footnote in Claudia's story, he was in for a surprise. Claudia and I weren't always like this. There was a time when we were inseparable. I was the man she had loved for years, and she was the untouchable CEO of a major bank. Back then, she looked at me with admiration, the way someone looks at their entire world. She believed that 2 people from vastly different backgrounds could conquer anything together. But Claudia had ambition. She had always been methodical, every move calculated to reach her destination. I, on the other hand, never cared for institutions, rules, or pre-approved paths. My heart belonged to music, the piano, the melodies. She used to love that about me. She would sit beside me on the piano bench, her head resting on my shoulder as my fingers danced across the keys. I wrote songs just for her, and once she told me they made her feel alive. You don't have to follow their rules, I had told her. You only live once. She had smiled then, a soft secret smile meant only for me. But as time passed, her admiration turned into resentment. You can't just live on music alone, she had said one evening, irritation creeping into her voice. Claudia needed stability. She never missed an opportunity. And she saw my refusal to play by the rules as a sign that I had no future at all. At first, the changes were subtle, gentle nudges for me to think about my future, to find something stable. Then the gap between us became impossible to ignore. One night, in our small apartment, the one we had moved into after college, Claudia came home late. She stood by the door, her posture stiff. We need to talk, she murmured. I already knew what was coming. This isn't working. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded. She had already made up her mind. And so I let her go. Claudia climbed the corporate ladder. I disappeared into my music, traveling from city to city. She built her grand halls. I played in jazz bars and on street corners. She became a powerful, respected name. And I became something she never expected. Now, standing in the heart of her world, I took in the ballroom. The chandeliers, the expensive suits, the careful conversations about mergers and power. This was her universe. So why did she invite me? Why are you even here? The voice belonged to Marcus, Claudia's younger brother. Unlike his sister, Marcus had never judged me. He had always appreciated my music, even sneaking into my performances just to listen. I smirked. Marcus shook his head. Richard is a fool. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. I chuckled, shaking my head. That's when Richard spoke again, louder this time, his voice cutting through the room. This is an event for people of status, he scoffed. He was enjoying his little power trip, and I could have humbled him with a few well-placed words. But instead I just laughed. Because this man, this so-called mogul, had no idea who he was insulting. Not yet. Marcus smirked. You really don't know who he is, do you? He murmured. For the first time Richard faltered. What the hell are you talking about? I could have told him the truth right then and there. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I simply took another sip of my drink. Richard would find out soon enough. And when he did, his entire world would crumble. Because I wasn't just some dropout. I wasn't just Claudia's past. I was something far, far greater. And Richard, he was in for the shock of his life. Soon, I realized I was bored and returned my focus to Claudia. She didn't respond, which was almost funny. I wondered how things would work out. But she couldn't deny it. No matter how much prestige or power she had accumulated, no matter how far she believed she had come, she had lost. Not because I sought retribution, not because I had a complex plan to degrade her, but because life has a way of working things out. Tonight was fate. I turned away from them and started to leave. But just as I decided to settle the score, Richard shouted after me one final time. Wait a minute, you're not really deleting your account, are you? I grinned and didn't bother to check. After giving it some thought, I left the ballroom, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered, but for all the wrong reasons. The night air felt cool against my skin as I made my way to the grand staircase, taking cautious, measured steps down to the courtyard. This wasn't how I had anticipated the evening to go when I first opened Claudia's invitation. I didn't have high expectations. I assumed she sent it out of duty, or perhaps to prove to herself that she had moved on. Had she won? I wasn't sure anymore. Not after the way she glanced at me back then. That wasn't the expression of a triumphant woman. It was the look of someone who had realized too late that everything she had estimated was wrong. The wind carried the muted buzz of voices from inside. Despite the tension that had cracked the flawless illusion, the celebration continued. I could only imagine the whispers spreading now, the hushed conversations dissecting the moment they had all personally witnessed. Even though I had been living outside their world for years, I had somehow still managed to reframe my existence within it. I was about to call for a car when I heard hasty footsteps at the bottom of the steps. I sighed as I waited. Before I even turned around, I recognized the person, Claudia. Her silhouette was framed by the golden lights of the ballroom entrance. She still held herself with that same graceful, poised control, even as everything around her seemed to crumble. But now, for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't the unwavering CEO. She wasn't performing for an audience. At this moment, she was simply Claudia. The same woman who had planned this perfect evening. The same woman I once shared late-night talks with. The same woman who used to curl up next to me while I played the piano, letting my music lull her to sleep. She descended the stairs slower now. Her voice was softer, more uncertain. We need to talk. I spoke quietly. There's nothing left to say. She let out a quick breath, shivering slightly. She shook her head, as if she couldn't believe I was truly leaving. I was wrong about you, she admitted, and I saw the faint tremor in her voice. I gave a dry laugh, glancing up at the city skyline, a never-ending expanse of steel and glass. Everything she had built. Where did you think I'd be? I finally asked, looking at her. She flinched because the truth had always been simple. She never truly loved me. She never truly believed in me. Maybe once she thought she did. But even then, love was conditional. She had always believed that one day, I would wake up and decide to pursue the kind of success she valued. She swallowed hard. You have no idea how many times I thought about calling you, she confessed. I moved closer, my tone firm but calm. You left me because I refused to change, Not because I lacked ambition. Her breath caught. I did pursue ambition, I continued. Just not the kind you respected. She had spent years telling herself that she had moved on, that her life was better without me. But now, on her wedding night, she stood in front of me, struggling to find the words to justify the choices she had made. I sighed. Are you happy? She opened her lips as if to answer, but no words came out. I smiled, realizing something. I didn't need her approval anymore. And that was the truth she had never been prepared for. She had spent all this time convincing herself that she had moved on, when in reality, I was the one who had. She had lost something she could never get back, and she knew it. I gave her one last look before turning away for the final time. Inside, Richard would still be trying to salvage his dignity. Guests would still be whispering about what they had just witnessed. Claudia would return to the ballroom, smile for the cameras, and play her role as the perfect bride. But tonight, long after the guests had left and the music had faded, she would lie awake, knowing that she had built the perfect empire, but lost the one thing that mattered most.